Yeah, that's a little bit about inspiration. And for me, I grew up very fortunate. I grew up in San Mateo, California, which was just south of San Francisco. Yeah, at a time when the San Francisco 49ers were the team in the NFL. And I grew up in a very sports centric family. I had three older sisters who I always say were all better athletes than I ever was. And I was just like their punky brat little brother that would follow them to their softball games at night, to their basketball games, and always cheered them on. And my dad loved sports. My mom loved sports. And it was just very much a part of our family. So many of the memories that I had as a kid were growing up on sports fields, going to the batting cage at night with my dad. I was the youngest of four, so we would always sneak off to the golf course when we wanted to have some boy time. And I learned just so many lessons, I think, from those early ages, being in my own family and being with sisters that were supportive of me, my mom. And then ultimately, I grew up on a street where there were, it was just a normal street in the Bay Area. There was 60, 70 kids on the street. This is when we used to play in the street. A lot of people in here probably played in the street too, but this was go down and make a right at the fire hydrant and, go right at the white car. Oh, don't get hit by the truck coming down, and the car would come and everyone would back off. So it was just a normal way to grow up. And I think that that was just such a great way for me to grow up in the Bay Area with a love for football and a love for sports in general, but to grow up on a street where that's what we did. We played football, two-hand touch, and in the street. We didn't have much of a front yard. We played, and if you hit the curb, that was out of bounds. So growing up, it was just so normal for me. And I really, in a way, still feel my life is like that. I don't feel like I've changed much over the years in terms of what my values were or what my priorities were. I just had those inspirational moments, I'd say, from growing up in the Bay Area and idolizing Joe Montana and Steve Young, who are my sports idols. And in baseball, Barry Bonds went to my high school. He's one of the greatest baseball players of all time. So there was these sports idols I had that really inspired me to dig deeper with myself. And I found a lot of people over the way, over 46 years, to support me in this journey.
Tom,
I was a bat boy, an honorary bat boy at a San Francisco Giants baseball game. And I was sitting in the dugout, and there was a great left-handed hitter who was one of my favorite players, Will Clark. His name was Will the Thrill.
Yep.
And he was my, at that time, the Giants, he was my favorite player. And he came out of I was sitting in the dugout, just scared shitless, not saying a word, looking straight ahead. And he came out from the tunnel, the clubhouse, and came up, and he was saying something in like a squeaky voice, "Where's my other helmet?" or something like that. And I just sunk back in my seat, and my dad was like, say something. I was like, I'm not saying anything. And then finally I stood up and I said, "Mr. Clark, I'm Tom, nice to meet you." And I said, "Tommy, this is Tommy, nice to meet you." And he said, "Nice to have you, kid." And, it was one of those moments where it was kind of really eye-opening for me. And, I had this opportunity when I was young to play. I was actually a pretty good baseball player when I was a kid. And I was just surrounded by all those sports. And I picked a high school where it was it was right down the street from my house, but it was very baseball-type school. And California, where I grew up, it wasn't really focused on football. There wasn't a ton of that. It was more baseball focused. So, but either way, there was a lot of sports. And, sports in all of our communities were pretty impactful and influential in the ways that, we grew up and we socialized. And, again, I was fortunate to grow up at a great time in football sports in the Bay Area. I think there was a work ethic that was in me. I think most people probably know a few things about me, but I was never, I would say, like a prodigy. I wasn't like the kid where you see Tiger Woods swinging on the Johnny Carson show at 2 or 3 years old, and his swing looks as good as it did at 3 years old as it did, as he grew older. Or certain players that had this unbelievable prodigy aspect to themselves. I saw myself as someone who probably had some other traits that maybe were hard to identify, but that were really sustainable over time, which was, I would say, work ethic and discipline. And that was instilled in me by, I think, my parents. I mean, there was part of it that they gave me, but also just behaviorally growing up in an environment where my dad was out to work every morning, trying to go make a living for our family. And my mom woke up every day trying to figure out how to make sure the home was comfortable for us and, to support the kids. So there was this discipline that I had that even as 13, 14, 15 years old, where all these other boys I went to an all-boy school in the Bay Area, and I remember showing up my first day as freshman year. I didn't have much, hair under my arms or anything like that. I was like, And these other kids came in shaving, and I'm like, what the hell is this? I didn't know how to put the pads on in my pants when I tried out for freshman football. I mean, I had never played until that point except in the street. So these kids came out there. They had helmets and shoulder pads that they had worn for 4 years through Pop Warner. And I went on the field, and I was like, I'm going to get killed out here. And my freshman year, I didn't even play. I was the backup quarterback on a team that went 0-8. That says a lot. I couldn't get on the field, and we never won a game anyway. I mean, it's one thing to be the starting quarterback and to lose. If they don't even think you're good enough to be a starting quarterback on a team that's 0-8, you must really suck. And the reason why I played my second year was because that quarterback quit because he's like, I'm not playing football anymore. We suck. I'm going to focus on basketball. So naturally, I was like, oh, cool. I'll continue to, work on my skill because I actually had a halfway decent arm. But a lot of it was even going into my second year in high school, there were workouts in the morning at 6 a.m. before school. And I was like, okay, I can get up at 6 a.m. and I can go do these rope drills where you'd run through the ropes. You see a lot of people do that. There were these hills that we would run up. And there was probably less than 10 people there, but I was probably one of the 3 that were there almost every single day to try to continue to push myself to grow in these maybe physical areas that I was really behind a lot of other people at. Because naturally, no one's good at everything. I mean, that's just not the way life works. We're all talented at certain things, but we can really continue to improve our weaknesses if we're humble enough to identify them, and we can build on our strengths. And I think we're all trying to find a more well-rounded aspect to ourselves, but a lot of that has to come with this understanding about yourself that what you know is very limited, and what you don't know is limitless. And you have an opportunity every day to surround yourself with people to help you grow. And that could be, in my case, it very much was my parents early on. And then as I learned to love the sport of football, I was watching kind of on the periphery of pro athletes, but there was a junior college football coach that I wanted to become a better passer because I had a good arm. And he was a 3-sport coach at a junior college. His name was Tom Martinez, one of my great mentors. And he coached women's softball, which is how really I knew him, women's basketball, and men's football. And I would go up there, and I would go up there to his camp to learn to throw the ball better when I was in 14 years old, 15 years old. And it just became this, like I said, life was pretty simple when you could kick a ball or throw it. And for me, it was throwing it, and I wanted to throw a ball better. So who better than to find this guy who was probably ahead of his time as a coach, and he taught me how to throw the ball with some good fundamentals. And I really saw that as like, wow, I can go see someone who has more knowledge than me, and I can learn from him, and I can take him back to my school, and everyone's going to go, wow, Tom, you made some improvements. And I think that was a good learning experience for me even at a young age.